Fantastic. So, hi, everybody. I'm Melissa Smith. As Jennifer noted, I am a licensed clinical mental health counselor residing in New Mexico. I am a longtime Texan, though, so thank you to AARP Texas for hosting this. We've had a long relationship with them, and I feel so grateful. I am a long distance caregiver, and I've been sort of in and out of that role with various family members. So I relate very dearly to caregiving and caregivers. And I will say that all of the material that we covered today is good for all, good for everyone. So whether you are a caregiver or going to be a caregiver or used to be, mindfulness is a practice in which each one of us can benefit from. So as you arrive today, I would love for you to type into the chat box um, uh, and let us know where you're zooming in from, and also what you have done perhaps to set yourself up for success today. So that means today's topic is creating connection through boundaries. And boundaries isn't always a popular topic, but it is definitely one in which I get a lot of requests for, and how to cultivate healthy boundaries in our lives. It's also a big buzzy word. In other words, I think now the pendulum can swing just a little too far, and then people suggest, well, I need to have a boundary here. And so, how do we have something that feels not like a hard wall or a hard line, but something in which that we can both express vulnerability in a mindful way and also express what we need and what we value in a relationship and come to an agreement there. So I love it. We got lots of Texans, someone from Minnesota and Lubbock and Florida. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Again, if you want the replay later, AARP does send it out. I will also send it out along with the previous links from other sessions. And if you want that, you can add your email address. If you've just joined us, I'll add in my email address here, which is caregivers with an S retreatinfo@gmail.com in case you're watching this later. And we also love feedback, so I'm open to that and receiving that. Whether you type it in the chat to me or you send me an email later, I certainly value and appreciate that. So today is about boundaries. So take a look around your room, wherever you are, wherever you are listening from, and what have you done to create? Because in order to be here, you have set a personal boundary. So maybe you've put your phone on silent. That would be a personal boundary. Maybe you did a lot of things to get ready and prepare in order to sit here for an hour with us today, which means you had to say no to something else in order to say yes to this. And so a boundary is simply that place in which, for a self boundary, you've chosen one thing over another and you're honoring that one thing. It doesn't always mean that it's a healthy thing. We often make choices which sometimes are outlets. I call them sometimes STIRBs, short-term energy relieving behaviors. So sometimes we do things in order to sort of, right, to make ourselves feel protected or better in the moment. And we create a buffer, and that buffer could be a boundary. And a boundary between two people is what is okay for me and what is okay for the other person, and how do we find that space between so that we both can feel like we're getting our needs or values met in a healthy way. So today there's going to be a lot of defining and definitions, but we're also going to do some mindfulness practice to keep us grounded in the moment. And so let's begin with just a really simple exercise. So wherever you are in your room, in your space, consider taking your eyes just a little bit off the screen. And if you will, let your eyes sort of land on something soft or soothing, or you can simply close your eyes. So whatever you've chosen is ideal for you. And then begin to notice how you're breathing today. Whether you're breathing in through the nose, whether you're breathing through the mouth, whether the breath feels shallow, whether it feels long, whether it feels expanded, whether it feels narrow, whether it feels choppy or smooth. So just noticing the breath. Now, wherever you are in your breathing cycle, exhale completely here and breathe in for a count of 4, 2, and 1, and a little pause, and then exhale for a count of 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let's do that again. Breathe in for a count of 3 or 4, whatever makes most sense for you, and find the top of the breath. And then as you pause, cascade into an exhale of 4 or 3. And then breathe in again for a count of 4. See if you can pause or retain the breath for 2 counts. 1, 2. Then exhale for a count of 3 or 4. And breathe in again for 4. Pause for 2, retaining the breath. Exhale for a count of 3 or 4. When you get to the bottom, let's do that again, but breathe in for a count of 4 or 5. Pause for a count of 3 or 4. So hold the breath. 1, 2, 3. And exhale completely. Exhale and see if you can find the bottom of the breath. And then do that again on your own. You've decided how long the breath is. It's a count of 3, 4, or 5. You'll retain or hold the breath. Maybe it's just one pause, or maybe it's as long as 5. And when you're ready to exhale, you'll exhale for a count of the same amount, 3, 4, or 5. And then now breathe naturally, just normal breathing. Breathing in and breathing out. Good. When you're ready, bring your eyes back to the screen. I'm curious how that felt for you. Feel free to type into the chat box. In fact, the more that you interact, probably the more that you will remember our session today. So breathing is a way that you can add a barometer to emotions, sensations, and also to heart rate. It is the one autonomic thing in which can help you control your heart rate. It gives us what's called heart rate variability. A few of you typed relaxing, I wound down, calming, beautiful, perfect. And so as you are thinking about how breath could help you, if breath tends to make you feel a little bit anxious, or am I doing it right? Or you still spin away in your thoughts or the narrative of whatever story it is you're creating, see if you can add counting to it, which will take away, right, the need for narrative. If you're counting, and if you're even counting on your fingers, even better. If you're counting while you're doing the breath, it gives you a focal point of concentration in which you can stop the spinning, at least for a few moments while you're doing the breathing exercise. And if you can notice either a change or even noticing no change, just the act of being curious will create a disruption in the nervous system, which will allow you to, right, have a little more clarity to hopefully be a little bit more responsive as opposed to reactionary. So breathing is like such a powerful tool, whether you count or just simply notice the breath, just getting curious. Yeah, I love it. Someone put in here, making exhales longer than inhales triggers the relaxation response. A great way to remember that is inhales are stimulating, so thumbs up. Exhales are calming, thumbs down, so down regulating. Inhale is up regulating. So if you want to stimulate, right, the body, you're going to make your inhales a little longer than your exhale. If you're trying to calm down, ground, or relax, you want to do something down regulating, which would mean you would want your exhales longer than your inhale. So the quickest way to remember that is inhale is stimulating, exhale is calming or down regulating. And so if you have equal breathing, which is what we were going for with the counting, so equal amount of inhale, equal exhale, then that would balance it out. So you get to choose, right? What makes sense for you. I think the most exciting thing is just to play with it. If you're experimenting and practicing, that's the secret sauce to mindfulness. If you can play and experiment, then you're going to help regulate yourself just at the very act of doing it. Okay, so I'm going to, let's see if I can share my screen here just for a moment. And as we move into a presentation, I'll flip back and forth. Feel free to add more comments or anything that you'd like, any offerings that you might have. Uh, I would so appreciate that. I think it helps, it certainly helps you remember or recall, which I think can be incredibly powerful. And let's see. All right. So as I share my screen here, continue to share this window using SharePlay. Okay, I hope so. Hopefully I've got it right. Fantastic. Oh, great. I love that someone's crowdsourcing. Does someone have a breathing app that they can recommend? There are definitely a lot of different ones out there. The ones that I tend to use are Insight Timer and 10% Happier. 10% Happier has I think all of them have a free trial period, but then they do cost. You can find a lot of things on YouTube if you were to Google some breathing exercises on YouTube. I would just be mindful of, um, what your doctor recommends about, especially retaining of breath and different breathing exercises that feel right for you. Always keep in mind you know yourself best and you know how your body feels, or you can check in with how it feels. And if some breathing practices do not feel right for you, you certainly don't have to do them. So, yeah. All right. So, boundaries. Ooh, boundaries. I feel like we want to just kind of get a little fundamental. So, if this feels like old hat, no problem. I would love to hear you expand upon it in the chat box. But boundaries are expectations and needs that help you feel safe and comfortable in relationships. And they need to be clearly stated through words and actions. I don't know how many of you have remember maybe a time where a parent or a teacher or someone would say something and ask you to do it, but then they didn't actually follow through. Or maybe you were one of those parents where you would sort of say something, but you knew that there was like, yeah, no one's going to check up on this. So why would I need to do that? Why would I need to fulfill that expectation? So, a really important, and I feel like this is so obvious, but it is really one of the pitfalls of boundaries. We'll say something, but then we backtrack, or we say, oh, but in this case, no, there's an exception to the rule. But boundaries need to be both malleable, but also have it backed up with actions. Expectations are, they help you stay emotionally and mentally well by defining the roles in the relationship and creating clarity. So what are boundaries for? They actually create an environment of safety. So imagine, right, if someone came in and explicitly stated an expectation at work, for example, wouldn't you love if you didn't have to guess what a boss or a supervisor was asking you to do? They weren't expecting you to mind read and know and then come back later and say you were supposed to just intuit how to do this. Wow, talk about lack of boundaries. There was no clarity there. Clarity provides a sense of embodied safety. And so when we're clear with what the understanding is, there's no guessing. It becomes a guidebook for how people treat you. if you're pretty wishy-washy, if you're not clear with your words, if you only show with actions or you only show with words but without action, then people are confused about the relationship. They can be very unclear about how to facilitate a good relationship. I was chatting with someone in their 20s, and they were kind of talking about, well, I'm not sure I want to be friends with this person because they don't respond quickly enough. They, I guess the word is they leave me on red. Are you familiar with that term? I wasn't exactly, but it means they read your message and it says read, but then they don't respond. And so for those anxious types, right? You're like, well, they saw it. Shouldn't they respond to it? But in actuality, you get to make a request. You get to say, hey, I would love if we could respond within 12 hours or within a certain amount of period. Then I don't have to worry about guessing what you need me to do here or what you would like to expect from one another. So it might require a conversation to create clarity, but that clarity also creates embodied safety and helps the other person know what your expectations are. Here's the tricky part about boundaries: they do not require agreement from the other person. Just because I request that person to respond within a certain amount of time, if it's possible, doesn't mean they have to adhere to it. And then you get to decide, is this relationship, how do I want to continue? So boundaries, much like, I don't know how many of you have raised teenagers, kind of like the sex talk that you would want to give, or like how to be safe. All of those talks you have with teenagers, they can't just happen once. They have to happen multiple times because, right, they're changing and growing and learning. All humans are the same. We need to continue to convey our expectations, especially if they're not being met, and doing it in a kind, clear, concise way so that the tone and the understanding is there. If we're doing it in a way that the other person isn't hearing us, then we get to ask why, or uh, ask more and more questions. In other words, provide some curiosity there. Okay, so sometimes that's a toughie. It defines how others treat you when you're not clear with expectations, and it doesn't require that the other person necessarily agree with you. All right, so why do we need boundaries? Well, it manages expectations, it helps sets limits, and when I talk about creating embodying safety, that's exactly what I mean about your mental health. When you have, right, a container, then there is an understanding. It's why we have guidelines, right, and traffic rules when we drive. We know what to expect when we come upon a roundabout with other cars, although some people don't know how to drive in them. But when you come in a roundabout, there's an understanding of a flow of a traffic. And because there is this understanding and guidelines, then people know how to behave in a, right, and know how to drive through a roundabout. This is what our life is, right? Our life is a roundabout. And if we have a certain understanding of how the flow goes, then we have an easier time with people and we can create that flow within relationship. Ooh, this is a toughie for caregivers to hear, I think. We cannot do it all, nor should we. We cannot do it all, nor should we. So I was recently working with a caregiver who has a full-time person who comes to the house to care for her loved one who has dementia, and she goes to work. And she was worried about asking this person to do some extra responsibilities. And in fact, it was within their duties and understanding from the company they were hired for that they were expected to do those things. But because she was afraid to ask, because she liked him, she was just, there was some general fear there. And so she was taking on this extra burden when she could have asked for help. I don't know how many of you can relate to that, but oftentimes we feel like, gosh, good help is hard to find. And as a caregiver, we don't want to burden other people. We want to do it ourselves, right? We think we do it the best. But we have to come at caregiving from more of a team approach. And right, the worst that can happen is the person could say no, or they could say, well, how about this? Or I'm not sure that that's within my scope, right? But if we don't ask, then we don't have, right, all of the things that we need. So it's important. Yeah, someone asked a great question. What if we don't know what our boundaries are? Well, that's a great question. I would ask in what context. So if you have an example that feels pretty neutral that you would want to share, I would love to hear more about that. And I think that um, if a boundary is unclear between two individuals, it is absolutely appropriate if it feels unclear to you that you ask, again, in a kind, clear, and a direct way, what exactly is the expectation of you? And you can always frame it in the affirmative. I would love to hear a little bit more about what you think my role and responsibility is in this, because I want to do a good job, and that it would express what you value. Any context. Often I don't know a boundary until it's crossed. Oof. We're going to get to that. Will you remind me of that in just a little bit? Um, if you don't know a boundary until you've crossed it, typically that means the other person is not necessarily skilled at expressing a boundary, that they just don't have that skill set. So, what do you do in order to change something? You have to bring something new to the table. And that new thing that you bring to the table would be, hey, I'm a little unsure about this. Or I really like getting to know you. What do you prefer? So if you every single time in any context end up crossing a line and the other person does something to shut it down, in other words, they become a wall, then that would require maybe some self-reflection. Is there something that I'm doing? Am I too porous? Do I say something that maybe could be said in a non-violent way? In other words, in a softer tone or in a way that can be received. I generally find if I'm asking more questions as opposed to telling, then I get to find out about the other person and we get to do this dance of what feels good for them and what feels good for me. I hope that was helpful. And we're going to explore this more. Ah, she says, I mean, when someone else crosses my boundaries. Okay. I think that's a really important thing to say. And we're going to definitely talk about that. So, um, you don't realize they've crossed your boundary until after the fact. Okay, we're going to talk about values in just a few minutes. And so we're going to get to that. Okay, so let's keep going. Why do we need boundaries? Well, we can't be everything to everyone, and we shouldn't try to be everything for everyone. So we get to say yes, no, maybe, not yet. We certainly can't please everyone. So if you tend to be a people pleaser, then you tend to have more porous boundaries. So difficulty saying no. And then I find in those circumstances, if you're someone who tends to be, right, and these are just generalities, tends to be more anxious or a people pleaser, then we have a hard time saying no to people. And then what happens is it stacks. And then you get a critical moment where you're like, if someone asks me just one more thing, I'm going to lose it, right? And then they've crossed that boundary. So it's really up to us to keep that container before it gets to be too far. Now, if in the case of someone really butting up against a boundary and we need to say something, there is a really simple formula for that. And I've got that in just a few minutes. All right. So, signs that you've got some unhealthy boundaries. Maybe you're neglecting self care. So, as a caregiver, if you feel like you're the only one who can do it, maybe for financial reasons or whatever, but you're not allowing or providing yourself moments for taking general care of yourself, or things are kind of unweighted in terms of how you are, those STIRBs that I mentioned earlier, short-term energy relieving behaviors, if they tip toward the unhealthy side as a way of coping, that would be a really big red flag. We want to turn toward our own boundaries, like what is healthy for me and what's not healthy for me, so that when we're offering boundaries for other people, that we have a better understanding. If you're feeling overwhelmed or burned out, it could be you're not asking for help. And who could you turn to for that? Or how can you reduce? Or, right, we want to look at what's underneath the burnout. What is the fundamental change that needs to be made in order to dissipate that? Maybe you have a desire to avoid responsibility or other people. So, avoidant techniques, right, while they can be a self preservation technique, they also prevent us from being vulnerable with others and getting to know other people's needs as well. Resentment. So, if you're feeling resentful, that's a big sign. If you're always the helper and never being helped, do you have a hard time accepting help? That would be a big sign. Inability to say no, unable to ask for help and do things without support, difficulty allowing others to help you. I think these are all ways in which we don't know how to say no. Do you tend to rescue or want to fix things? That would be an unhealthy boundary unless that person has asked for it. Loaning money or possessions without being asked to do so. And this is a fine line in defining codependency or enmeshment in dysfunctional relationships. So that's kind of a mouthful. When we think about codependency, probably the simplest way to think about it is if let's say I'm going to use the example of my son. If he's not okay, then I'm not okay. If I'm not okay, he's not okay, right? That would be an example of codependence or enmeshment. Counterdependence or healthy dependence would be, hey, how are my son's in university? How are those exams going? How can I support you? Rather than, oh, you need to study, you need to da 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 da, right? Like do all these things. I can find the space between us so that he can begin to be self-reliant and I can extend an offering of support, but I don't have to. So there is a counter dependence rather than a codependence. And we could probably talk quite a bit about that. Let's take a quick break with mindfulness here before I dive into how do I know if I have unhealthy boundaries. So, if you will, I would love for you to take a moment and notice either what you're sitting on or notice your feet and shift just a little bit right and left, or shift your feet right and left. So as you do that, just notice what you notice. I can feel my spine kind of wanting to kind of move a little bit. If I were to shift my feet right and left, I would feel the weight in my feet or tingling. Just a few more moments of that little bit of rock side to side or tapping. And your body is breathing. You're just noticing. Okay. When your seat feels a little heavier or your feet feel a little heavier, bring your eyes back to the screen. Take a nice long exhale. And then what did you notice with that exercise? I would be curious if you want to type that into the chat box. Anytime we can move our attention away from story and into the body, whether it's a self-soothing thing like a little bit of a rock, I could even have just put pressure, right foot, left foot, right foot, left foot. So when someone is talking at me, not with me. When someone's talking at me, maybe instructions, or even if this feels a bit like that, like where this is much more learning oriented, you're having to use that part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, which is taking in information, or if I'm receiving instructions from someone, if I'm caregiving, right? And I get a little bit overwhelmed, or I'm trying to remember the details. I often will do that little bit of rocking or a little bit of tapping with my feet to keep myself in my own body to stay grounded. And I find when I do that, I don't know how many of you are doodlers, if that's something that helps you concentrate. It's a similar concept or principle. So I'm able to focus a little bit more on what the person says when I stay in my body rather than jumping, right? Jumping way ahead. Am I going to do it right? Am I going to remember all the details? So I'm going to just check the chat box. Will we get a copy of the slides? That's a great question. If you would like that, you can put your email address in there and I would be happy to do that. It'll also, of course, be in the recording of the presentation. So yeah, thanks for asking. So just noticing, right, how you feel. Probably many of you already have quite a few grounding tools that you maybe even don't even realize. I have a friend who fiddles. She'll click something, or she'll rub her hands together, or she'll play with a seam on her jacket. And that is actually, it's nothing wrong with it. It's a self-soothing thing. And she wasn't really even aware that she was doing it. And I got curious about it and just validated her experience. Like, that's really cool. You have this thing you do when you feel a little nervous to help you calm down. We all have these things, and there's nothing wrong with them, right? If we tend to fidget, or we want to doodle, or if we shift side to side, those that is your body actually being very intelligent and giving you information. It's telling you that it needs to regulate. And you're doing these autonomic things to help yourself regulate. So I'd be curious what other little things that maybe you do that help you ground or regulate. I would love to hear that in the chat box. I'm going to carry on here to how do I know if I have unhealthy boundaries? Okay. So paying attention to feeling and sensation. So we just did an example of that little bit of fidgeting. And if I am, right, if I figure out what my self-soothing is and I'm starting to do it automatically without really thinking, that's an interesting information and cue to what am I experiencing in this moment? Is anger rising? Is fear rising? Is anxiousness rising? How is this boundary affecting me? And it's information. So that's when you get to come back and come at the boundary with clarity. I want to really understand here. Can you tell me one more time? Can you express to me? Or here's what I think you're trying to say. So anytime you can create more clarity and do it in a tone and in a way that the other person can receive, man, that's the foundation and building blocks to a healthy relationship. Do you ignore your intuition? So, intuition isn't always correct. I know that might be controversial, but sometimes that sensation or feeling in the body is like an alarm system that goes off. And sometimes our alarm systems aren't always accurate. So if you, let's say you grew up in a home where it was people argued and yelled and you would shut down. Well, and if you get into a healthy relationship and you keep shutting down, your intuition says, I need to shut down and walk away. Is it always true that you would want to listen to that? Or maybe do you find a way to regulate and ask questions? So sometimes our body develops these protective measures and protective methods, which aren't always accurate for every situation and every relationship. And that's where if you can create a pause, a space to take a breath, to notice, to ask a question. Then you can tap into, is that intuition here correct? And guess what? If you make the wrong guess, you can still come back and make amends. So if you have been kind, clear, and direct, it's hard to make amends if, you run away or shut down, right? We want to really listen to the body and notice. A couple of questions have arrived. Perfect. Okay. So let's answer this together. If you've got a piece of paper, this would be a great one, and I'll float it through here in a second if you want to take a screenshot of this to kind of help you feel like, where is this particular situation? Is it leaning toward healthy or unhealthy? So answering this question, I fear setting a boundary with, and fill in the blank. Could be a neighbor, it could be a relative, it could be a friend or someone at work, about blank, fill in the blank. I worry or fear setting a boundary with Bob about this issue at work. The next question to ask yourself is, I assume they're going to react the following way. So again, the story in your head is based on maybe how they responded last time, maybe based on how you experienced something similar in the past. I'm worried that they're going to get mad at me. When I interact or see a text from this person, I feel anxious or angry. It could be the same person or it could be different. It might be an indication that, and you get to fill in the blank here. So when I interact with my neighbor Bob about my dog barking, I feel really anxious because I don't want to upset other people. I don't want my dog to be that dog in the neighborhood. It might be an indication, that anxiety feeling, that I'm making big assumptions. Maybe the barking doesn't actually bother Bob, but it bothers me. And then I'm worried about other people, right? Or it could be an indication that my dog needs to be walked more often, right? So it's just information as you're thinking through your relationships. These are great questions to ask yourself so that you can get a litmus for, am I creating a narrative or is this a fact? So another question to ask was, do I become frustrated when Bob does this? And if there's a Bob here, I'm so sorry. Do I become frustrated when so and so does this certain thing? Right? So that frustration might be an indication of an unexpressed boundary. I would feel better if they did what? If they asked me first, if we communicated, if they were kind about it, right? So what would help you feel soothed in this situation? It would be helpful if I set the following boundary. It would be helpful if I set the following boundary. Hey, Bob, if my dog is barking when I'm at work, and does that bother you? Does it disturb you? Do you have ideas or suggestions? I was thinking about getting someone to come and let him out at noon, and maybe that will help. What do you think? Right? So I get to have this conversation rather than this big story in my head. So boundaries. Porous boundaries. Oof. So how do you know if you just don't have boundaries? Um, let's say it's a relationship. It could be a parent-child relationship. It could be a caregiver, a person you care for relationship. It could be any kind of relationship. Do you feel anxiety when you're apart? So have things not been set up in such a way that you feel an unnecessary amount of anxiousness when you're apart? That could be an indication of porous boundaries. Dependency on feedback on others. In other words, you're not okay unless you know everybody else is okay with you, right? maintaining all the same thoughts and values. Well, not everybody's going to have the same thoughts and values as you. An entanglement in people's emotions and thoughts with your own. So in other words, there's not a separation. We're assuming people believe and think the same about a particular thing. And when they don't, right, feeling upset about that. They're going to have different belief systems than you. I have paralyzing fear of being rejected, but it could just be a worry of being rejected. So if your fear of setting that boundary has you almost like shutting down or not saying anything at all about what your request is for fear that they might leave you or have some sort of abandonment, right? Or rejection, that could be an indication of some porous boundaries. If you tend to overshare, maybe you know somebody who tends to say too much and it makes you even question, gosh, are they talking about me when I'm not with them? Um, Sharing everything because it's expected? Yeah, it's not. You don't have to share everything. Seeing differences as a threat, that could be a porous boundary. Agreeing with everything, that would definitely be an indicator of a porous boundary. Believing it's your job to fix other people. I don't know how many other have worn that hat for a while. Never making decisions without including others. Do you know those people who have to take a big poll of everyone before they can make a decision? Right? So they have some ambivalence and just really wanting to make sure that everybody feels okay. When in actuality, you are going to disappoint some people by not making a choice or making a specific choice about something. Unable to say no at all. That would be an indicator. Supporting unhealthy habits that keep people dependent upon you. So that would be a form of enabling, would be some porous boundaries. So what are the opposites? You've got really, I always think of it like as a spaghetti strainer, right? So those porous boundaries are the things that just slip through and soak everything. Even if you've sort of set a boundary, it still gets soaked because you have those other things. But rigid boundaries are like walls, and those are impermeable, right? So sometimes we have rigid boundaries out of protection or fear. And I will say, as a caveat here, that oftentimes we do need to have stronger boundaries with if it involves any of the following: domestic violence, um, emotional or physical abuse would be in those categories. Um, Environments in which you feel a lack of embodied safety, you might need to have rigid boundaries. I could go on, and I think you've got the idea here. You want to have protection, but am I over protecting myself in a way that nobody can even get to me? And so am I protecting out of fear rather than reality? Stringent rules with no flexibility at all. Certainly things like traffic rules, those are not flexible. We have stop signs for a reason, right? So to keep those around us safe. So there are certain things that are principles, underarching principles, and that's what boundaries are. They give us sort of guidelines. But if they are hard and fast rules, we need to think about when are rules appropriate and when do they become roadblocks for relationships. Counterdependency. We believe we don't need anyone. So counterdependency is that idea in which I do it myself, right? Only I can do it, right? So you're pushing away others unnecessarily. Rigid boundaries do give a false sense of safety if they are really truly not needed in a safety aspect. Other things that might include that would be never sharing, building walls around yourself, avoiding vulnerability, cutting people out. Again, there is a time and place to have those hard and fast rules, and you get to decide what those are. But are you doing it with everyone? Are you doing it unnecessarily or without being generous with the other person? In other words, can you assume the best until proven otherwise? Do you have high expectations of others and they just can never meet it? That would be really rigid boundaries, and enforcing strict rules. So, personal boundaries provide safety, interdependence, they provide that flow. There are bottom lines to things. In other words, you want to understand what your own needs are in order to set a boundary. We want to respect other people's boundaries, right? So if you ever found yourself on the other side of the fence going, nah, I'm gonna do this anyway, right? So maybe it's not a conscious thought, but if we could start to be aware of what those expectations are, and we can ask for clarity. Um, Sharing yourself in ways that feel comfortable to you. That is important with personal boundaries. So how do I honor what my needs are and honor my own agency and my own respect for my own body while still having respect for the other person? If I don't have respect for the other person, can I still be kind? Can I assume the best in the other person? Right? That principle of generosity and healthy boundaries in one relationship does not mean you've got healthy boundaries across all relationships. In fact, you might feel anxious with one group of people and really comfortable with another. And it's going to look very different in different scenarios. Um, yeah. Thank you so much for sharing this. Sometimes I feel challenged between being kind and caring Christian. Yeah, I understand that. So religious beliefs and values, and this ideal, right? This tenet in which you have to express kindness doesn't mean it gets to make you a doormat. It doesn't, because I believe you can still be clear and say it in a kind way and still be firm so that you get your needs met. It is really, and it doesn't make you less of whatever your faith is, but it does provide you with a foundation in which both persons can get their needs met. And let's go ahead and jump to that. I put on some benefits here of healthy boundaries. Um, and that is, right, healthy boundaries, they actually reduce guilt. When you're clear about your expectations, guilt is, I've done something wrong. Well, actually, expressing a need doesn't make it wrong. It enables the other person to have an understanding of you, and you have an understanding of them, of what their capacity is. And that would reduce feelings of guilt. Um, Maybe you, with this conversation today, you're realizing you've got some unhealthy relationships, and maybe you do need to have some stronger boundaries, or maybe some things need to be addressed. When you have healthy boundaries, healthy relationships get even better. And they help you discover who you are, discover what your strengths are, what you bring to the table in relationships. It also helps you understand others and cultivate, right? If you think about a relationship as a circle, there is respect on one side of the circle and trust, and there is love or kindness or compassion. You can fill in the blank there, but it becomes this circle. And the circle is, right, where the two of you come together. It also helps you improve your ability to be assertive, asking for your needs. So I would love for you to write and fill in this blank. I deserve blank. I deserve blank. I deserve to have healthy relationships. I deserve to be heard and listened to. I deserve um, to have more time. I deserve, right? So, what is it that you deserve? That is a question about needs. We're going to come to that screen here in just a second. So, next, I would love for you to list what you can start saying no to. Whoo, that would be a good one. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, someone just asked me if I would put another screen up, and I will do that at the very end. Thank you. If you could make a quick list, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? What can I start saying no to that maybe has kind of felt a little unhealthy, or that has been a theft of your time, or that maybe someone else could do that might be more appropriate for that task. For me, what I have been conscious of is every message that comes through, I don't need to look at it right away and I don't need to answer it right away. In fact, I think I'm a better friend when I have a time in which I thoughtfully respond to someone versus firing off a quick message that I might regret later. So that's one way that I've begun to say no in my own personal boundaries. No, I'm not going to answer things immediately. I'm actually going to take a little more time. So let's take a little inventory here. How do we set boundaries? Well, we need to understand what we need and want. And that's not easy to understand what our needs are. Have you ever had someone ask you, what do you need? And you're like, I don't know because no one's ever asked me. It would be important that you start reflecting on that. Well, I need rest. I need sleep. I need to eat regular meals. I know these are very basic things. I need to have enough time to exercise, or I need to find some time to do X, Y, or Z because it brings me a lot of joy. Another thing to think about in setting boundaries and how to do it is what is okay and what is not okay. And I have here me first, which may not fit everyone's philosophy or belief system, especially in terms of their faith. Because often we're taught, and whatever your faith is, we're often taught that other people's needs need to be met first. I remember as a mom, um, I would whatever was on my plate, my kids wanted, and I would just give, and then I realized there was nothing left to eat. So what I began doing is setting aside a little plate for myself, and I would still sit down with them, and I would right be feeding and eating with kids, and then I would still have enough for myself. And that was something I had to learn to do because I wanted to share and I wanted to have that offering, but I would often do it at the sacrifice of myself. And I don't have to sacrifice my own needs. This too, both and, yes and. So there is a way to meet in the middle. Practice with yourself. Someone put, I need all those basic needs you described. Yeah, right? And so what that means is we all get 24 hours in a clock. There is some place that all of your time is going toward that you could do a few minutes here and there less of. It might be scrolling on your phone. It might be asking a neighbor for help. It might be, I don't know. I don't know your particular situation, but all of us have the same amount of time. And the way that which we divide it up is a big indication of what we believe about our own boundaries and what we believe about ourselves. And I understand financial disparity. I understand that you may be the only caregiver. And my hope is that is a season and not a permanent situation because it's unsustainable. And so, however, you can develop a community of people in which you can have more and more of your own needs met, give you the capacity to help others. So, you've got to practice with yourself. Healthy communication. Be clear, do not over explain, and you do not have to ask for permission. So, if you do ask for permission, it would look in the form of, would you be willing? Or I would like to request. Or this is really important to me. I really feel anxious when you arrive at 9:10 and the start time is 9 o'clock because I need to go to work. Would you be willing to be 5 or 10 minutes early? And if you're not, let's talk about how we can make this work because it's not working for me. So you get to be clear, concise, and you don't have to ask for, right? Is this okay that I ask to go to the bathroom? No, you get to go to the bathroom. You also want to pick the right time to set a boundary or to talk about boundaries. I would venture to say 9 or 10 o'clock at night is not a good time. For some of you, early in the morning is not a good time. Midday may not be a good time. I don't know. But you do get to ask the other person, do you have a moment? Would you be willing to talk about this? Is now a good time? And you get to check in on, is the other person regulated? If you're sensing that they're dysregulated, you get to take a deep breath. Maybe go for a walk as you talk about it, or you get to change the setting, but you get to choose the time. And it is important because often, if the other person is dysregulated, they won't be able to hear you. Yeah, someone put yes and what a revelation. Yeah, yes and this too, both and. So there is a way to meet in the middle. Maintenance. I said earlier that you have to often repeat your boundary over and over and over again. And yep, it's exhausting. Yep, why do you have to be the emotionally regulated one? I don't know, because maybe the other person isn't growing. Maybe the other person is the person you're caring for. Maybe a lot of different things. But if you're here, that tells me you're interested in growth. So if you are the growth oriented one, you are the one who will probably have to continuously repeat your request. And that's not a bad thing, especially if this person can't be removed from your life, if they are in your life for whatever reason, or maybe more distance needs to happen with this person. So there are lots of different caveats to this discussion, and it's impossible for us in a single hour to talk about all the different scenarios. But in general, boundaries require your maintenance. And when do you break a connection with a person? When do you have a hard and fast boundary? I would say when your safety or the safety of another person is compromised, that would be an important clue. That would be important to express, hey, this isn't serving me anymore. And that is really tough. If you've ever been on the other receiving end of that, that is also tough. And I feel for you. But oftentimes, relationships are here for a period or a season. And some relationships are for a lifetime. And it's important for us to begin to know when those relationships wane, when you're no longer receiving what feels equitable for you. Have you communicated it? Have you asked for it? So before you break off or ghost someone or just say enough's enough, right? Have you actually had a conversation about what each of you and your needs are? That's really important. Okay, so what are your needs? Here is a huge list. Um, yeah, I love that someone wrote, I matter too, and that is something I have to remind myself of. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to scan this list, and I'm going to list some of these out for those of you who aren't able to read the screen. Um, these are universal needs, meaning most humans need these things. Um, security, physical sustenance. So, right, you need basic needs as shelter, food, water, touch, safety. Safety is a basic need. Security, being able to cultivate trust, freedom, autonomy. Relaxation is a basic need. Getting the right amount of rest, affection, connection, mattering. You matter. Acceptance, kindness, community is a basic need. A sense of self, a meaning making, um, understanding, coming to clarity, learning, and a sense of aliveness or purpose, transcendence, faith, your religious beliefs, peace, hope. These are all universal needs. So I would love for you to pick one right now. Someone wrote, I matter. Someone wrote autonomy, right? So pick one. We need many things, but pick one in particular. And then pick a person in which you would like either now or in the near future, like to express this need to. Maybe don't pick someone on a scale of 1 to 10, a 10, but uh, in between that. And I see I've also come to time. So we're gonna take a part two to this in our next session. So I want to make sure that we continue this. So this will be a part two next time, in addition to our other information. But stick with me just a few more moments if you can. Take your eyes just a little bit off the screen. As you picture this person and this need that you have, imagine already embodying it. So as you breathe in and breathe out, maybe it's autonomy. I am autonomous. Maybe it's I matter. Maybe it's I deserve love. I am love. I deserve honesty, respect, integrity. I would like. And just notice what it feels like to imagine being in the room with this person or alone with yourself, however it feels right for you, and embodying this quality and this need. I embody. And take just a few breaths. Yeah. Breathing in and breathing out. Someone else put leisure, relaxation. That makes my shoulders drop. I deserve relaxation. I need relaxation. Perfect. And I know, and I'm aware we're a few minutes over. I'm normally so good with time. This is such an important conversation. So if you're wanting to know the secret sauce for boundaries, go ahead and screenshot this or take your phone and take a picture. And I'll be sending this out when I send out the videos. So if you would like the copy of this recording, you can put your email address in there. I also upload them to YouTube. And yes, there's been a series, and I have been back with AARP every year. And so there are many recordings, and I can send you the link to those recordings. So how do you ask for what you need? When I see, and you want to keep it factual, I gave the example of someone being late. I didn't say when you're late. That's too vague. When you arrive at 9:30 and the start time is at 9, I feel frustrated. I feel angry. I feel confused because I really value timeliness. I really value your time and my time. Would you be willing to figure out a way to get here earlier? Would you be willing to compromise if you need more time in the morning, or maybe we make the start time a little bit later if we can? But would you be willing to reconsider? So when I see the fact, I feel fill in the blank because I really value, and that's your need. I really value relaxation. I really value my rest. I really value our trust that we built here. Would you be willing to do X, Y, or Z? Yeah. So one more opportunity to take a quick screenshot if you would like. Okay, and I'm going to stop sharing for just a moment. And I think someone had asked me to pull up another screen, and I will do that. A few people have given me your email address. I will follow up with that later. All right, so let's just take a big inhale and breathe in all the way up to your shoulders. So breathe in, inhale, lift your shoulders. Exhale, drop your shoulders. Do that again. Breathe in and lift your shoulders. Exhale and drop your shoulders. It is so wonderful that you chose to be here today, and thank you so much. When I send out the recording link, I will also send out the slides to those of you who've requested it. If you're watching this later on YouTube, you can also shoot me an email, and you can find that probably in the notes below on the recording. It is such an honor and a privilege. I will be back in 2 weeks. The link in which you registered for this, you will find the link to the next one, and you must individually register for each session. It doesn't automatically register you for each session. So I'm going to end the recording, and I'm going to stay a few more minutes for those of you who had questions. Again, my name is Melissa Smith. I am based in Santa Fe, New Mexico, but a longtime Texan, and so grateful to AARP Texas for having me today. So thank you so much.